I'm also not saying liberalism is, by the way, the way of Jesus either. So don't hear me wrong. I'm just saying don't align yourself in that. They were exclusively allegiant to Jesus, not to anybody else. That was their first allegiance and only allegiance. Let me give you a quick quote about that. Tom Holland, in his book Dominion, he talks about this just a little bit, but he says, distinctiveness in an age of the empire that proclaimed itself universal. So the empire would say, we are the empire of all things. You come to us about your religion. You come to us about who you serve and how you serve. In that empire, he says that if you were to go against that, that you might as well rank as defiant. Like, this is defiance that they were doing. Third, he says there's a singular faith, just one faith. They had no other faith. So there was no multiple gods, multiple spiritualities at a time where that was very common. There were lots of gods that you would worship. There was just one God that you worshiped, only one faith, and there was no other faith that you could come by at that time to be in alignment with Jesus. It was just one faith, which was very radical. Today we still see that a little bit, right? Where it's like, yeah, I do the Jesus thing, but I also do some other stuff. I'm very spiritual. It's very spiritual. What does that mean? They found one faith that did all of this. Again, Tacitus was not thrilled about this when Tacitus wrote about their singular faith. In fact, he would talk about how they went against the faith of the Roman gods. Tacitus would say that they did not believe in the gods of Rome. There were gods, right? The first lesson absorbed by converts is to despise the gods, meaning Rome's gods, or the Greek gods, to renounce their country and to view their parents or children or brothers as expendable. He's saying like they gave up all their old allegiances and they moved to something new, which is what Peter's actually encouraging to do in some ways. What we see here is that he's saying there's going to live in a different way. I'll never forget, like, again, when we moved out to Washington, and I'll just use that as an example. There's plenty of other ways we could talk about this. But just the other day, I was here in church. A friend of ours from here, had gone out and visited Seattle for like a couple of weeks. And they went out and did a cruise, and they came back, and they happened to be there during Pride Week, which if you've ever seen Seattle during Pride Week, it's wild. And they came back, and they were like, how did you ever live out there? Like, how did you do that? If you don't know anything about Seattle, very liberal city. I actually lived in one of the most liberal cities in America. We had a university there that was considered the most liberal university in America. And people would come from all over the area to go to this because it was known for its free-for-all. It was known for weeks of the year where there would be just massive campus orgies. There were things that would happen on that campus, just crazy stuff. They also had, this is a very liberal arts thing, it was kind of fun. They also had a part of their programs where you could just name your own major and just do it. Like, you just make up your own, whatever you want to do. And it'd be like, I'm going to major in Curious George studies, and they'd be like, let's do it. Okay, you write your curriculum, and you make your own studies, and we'll say that you have a degree. It's like, I should have done that. That would have been so much better, right? Like, I could have majored in nachos. Lived out a lifelong dream, you know? When you open your nacho restaurant and you can say, no, I have a degree in nachos, like, that's a competitive advantage that not everybody has. That's pretty big. Anyways, and it was a very liberal area, and people would come to me and they'd be like, how did you live out there? But then people that lived out there would be like, how did you ever live in Florida? Like, how did you survive that? I don't know if you know, we have very different cultures. It's very different places. And there would be people there that would tell me, like, how did you live in Florida? But people here ask me how did I live there? And I'd be like, well, I mean, like, they would ask me, like, how did you live there? You know, the sexuality is so different, the way people view that. Or the way they view marriage is very different than the way we view marriage. Or the way that they view, you name the issue, but I mean, whether it's immigration or the way they view refugees, the way they view the environment or how we take care of the world around us. How did you live there when they view that very differently than we do? And I would be like, well, also, when I moved there, people would be like, how did you live in Florida? Like, we're like, I don't know, there's a gun under every passenger seat or whatever. How do you live in Florida where nobody does care about these things? The earth that apparently you say God created. How did you live in Florida where people do not welcome in those refugees from other places, as the Bible talks a lot about actually welcoming in the foreigner or the exile, for instance? Like, how did you not do that thing? Like, how did you live there when that was so different? I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. I'm just saying, like, We get polarized on these things, and what we do is we don't find that there's this other thing. Jesus' followers in the early days would have never been able to be constrained by any party or any siding. It's just impossible. You could not have had the two sides that we have of the aisle today. You could never have pigeonholed them into one or the other. It's just not possible. I'm sorry, maybe that's terrible to say, maybe you disagree with me. But they would have been 100% nonviolent, like 100% nonviolent. That's just the way it was taught. After Jesus picks up the ear that Peter cuts off and puts it back on, you see an entire shift in that culture of Jesus followers that nonviolence would have been the only way they would have lived. They would have never taken up arms for Rome, especially. Are you kidding me? Like that was not who they were. Now, I'm not saying Christianity's followed that because we have had crusades and all kinds of terrible things, but that was never the way that was supposed to be. They would have been absolutely known for their inclusiveness of people different than them. Doesn't mean they said that they could stay that way, but they would at least welcome people in, especially the foreigner, especially the person who was of different origins or skin color, or people who were different races, or women, or people who had been seen as less than. They always welcomed that group in. That was actually the only way they grew. And so they always welcomed those people in. But they would have been very, very conservative about their sexual ethic, about the way that they viewed their own body and how they were supposed to use it. You could not have put these two things together. It would not have computed in today's culture. And so when Peter's saying they're exiled, he's saying culturally, you're not going to fit probably either side here. You're not going to be in either one. Scott McKnight talks about kind of the view of how this works. Scott McKnight's one of my favorite authors on really most things, but he talks about this a little bit in Peter. But he says, the issue facing the Christians in Asia Minor was disturbingly simple. How should we live in this context of social exclusion and persecution? Like we live in a context where it's going to be different for us. We're not going to fit into every mold. He's saying, should we escape into a more sheltered world? Should we go into that bubble? Is that the goal? Should we withdraw from society? Should we be monks or in a monastery? Should we turn a cold shoulder to our world? Should we denounce society in poetic and prophetic tones? Like, what do we do? Do we go after them now? How then should we live? Peter's letter is a window into a situation that even throws light on our world. Not just his world, our world today. His letter is one of the first struggles in the church with society. This is really where it all begins. And he talks about this. Now, you might hear it and think about this as like, I just need to live in the world and not of the world. You know, I've had somebody literally tell me my favorite verse in the Bible is where it says to live in the world and not of the world. Friends, that is not a Bible verse. That is a song by a Christian group called Avalon. That is what that is. It's this group right here. They sing a song about living in the world, not of the world, in beautiful four-part harmony. And that is what it was. It's not a verse in the Bible. But the context, I do understand, it is a thing. It does feel, that is true. You might be thinking that, like it's living in this and not of it. Like not taking part in everything about it, but living with one foot in this world and another foot in the next. This intersection that we live at many times. Peter tells them in chapter 2, verse 9, he says, but you are a chosen people. You're going to live different. You're a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Notice this, that you have come from nations and you might feel disparate from those nations. Guess what? Now you're in a new nation. You're living at this intersection of what has been and what is ahead of you. And you're a new nation within that. You've left your old one and now you're a new one. It's a holy one. You're God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. You were there, now you're here. You're at this intersection of those two things, which leads us to the last part, and it's very simple, is hopefully you see where this is going, but this leads us to the spiritual. That he's saying, you are here spiritually. This is where you belong. You're at this intersection of two things. You're at the intersection of where you've been and where you're going. I recently met with a woman that I know who's an immigrant who came from Afghanistan. And she came as a refugee because the Taliban, when it came in, they tried to kill her. And so she had to flee. She was an air traffic controller for one of the airports there. And because she was a highly educated woman, the Taliban, that's one of the first things that they were executing, was highly educated women because they did not believe women should have any power in the society. So she had to literally go to the airport one day, had to smuggle her way in, and then find some U.S. Soldiers who would get her on a plane. She got into a cargo plane, and there was no seating room. It was a cargo plane with only standing room for a 5-hour flight. As they stood in this cargo plane with hundreds of other people, and that cargo plane went down the runway and took off, and she got out to freedom. And then she had to say, but from that point she said, I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I was nowhere where I had been. I missed everything I had known about Afghanistan, but I knew I couldn't stay. I had to find this new place. And she said, they took me to Germany, then they took me to Washington, D.C., then they took me to Texas, then they brought me to Florida. Now I live here in Florida. And she said, I like it here. I love it here. I love the things that I'm finding. I do miss the things that I had. I miss what I was and where I was. I don't get to be an air traffic controller anymore here. I don't get to do the things that I love to do, but I'm so happy that I am here and I'm finding this new path. She lives at the intersection of being an exile. Many of us, that's where we find ourselves, and that's where we should find ourselves. Is there's a part of what we're going to miss about the world that we've been growing up in, but a part that we're pursuing that's going to be so much better as we look forward to the future, as we find ourselves in a new freedom that we're allowed to be in, as we look towards the future of the freedom that God's called us to. We find ourselves at this intersection right now. This is where we're at. And even St. Augustine writes about this. St. Augustine, yes, the guy who St. Augustine is named after from Hippo, he writes about this quite a bit too. He tells us that he sees humanity, talking about Peter, the church and the state from the viewpoint of eternity. And he says, he points out that all Christians are pilgrims who every day we take a step forward towards the city of God in heaven. By the way, that's the name of this book that Augustine wrote, was A City of God. As the people of God, they should they should live their lives differently from those of the citizens of the earthly city. It should be different. They need to arrange all aspects of life in the perspective of the pilgrim eschatology, which is a continual reminder of the ultimate and spiritual reality of the world. It's going to look different than what was there before. We're going to move forward. This is why at the beginning of time, God creates not just earth, but in Genesis 1:1, it says that God creates the heavens and the earth, because both are important. And guess what? The rest of our lives, as we follow Jesus, we're going to find ourselves at the intersection of those two things, of the heavens and the earth. That we are living in this intersection of the future of heaven, where everything will be perfect and it will be right and everything will be good. Where we believe that the brokenness of the world will be made beautiful. We believe that all of the imperfections of this world will be made perfect once again. Where things will be made right in the kingdom of God. And we live at the intersection of those two things. This is why I believe that God does not come down after you accept Jesus. Like when you're in your whatever service and you know, every head bowed, every eye closed, you raise your hand, you pray the prayer, you accept Jesus. Why doesn't Jesus just come down and suck you up with like a cosmic vacuum? There's just a massive Dyson that comes out of the clouds, and it just sucks you up out of here because you did it. You made the commitment. You're now a follower of Jesus. Why don't you get pulled out of the world? Why don't I get pulled out? Why don't we get out of here? We already did the commitment thing. We're good. We found Jesus. Now we don't need to be here anymore, right? No, we stay here on earth because we are the intersection. We are living at the intersection of heaven and earth. And God has a purpose for us to be here still as exiles. As exiles of his kingdom in this earth. We're living here. This is where we are for this reason. Because we find ourselves at that intersection. There's a way that the early church found themselves living this way. They were the intersection of heaven and earth, living in one body as exiles in this world. And I want us to understand that so that we can see how we're supposed to live. If we don't understand where we are now, we can't understand where we're supposed to go. We have to see where we are now to know where we're supposed to go. There's a beautiful letter that was written, and this was about 130 AD, and it was this epistle that was written. And it was written to a group trying to explain what the early Christians were like. And I would love to just kind of read this and see how we line up with this. See how you line up with this. And see if this makes sense or if this feels like where we're at right now. If you are here. It says this. For Christians... Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go to the next thing, buddy? I'm sorry. Go to the epistle. Go down a little bit there, I think. There we go. So it says at the beginning, is there a slide before this? There we go. Is this it? All right. Go to the beginning of these, buddy. I'm sorry. I told Oliver to follow me today, and it's my fault. All right. For Christians are no different from other people in terms of their country, their language, or their customs. Nowhere do they inhabit cities of their own, or use a strange dialect, or live life out of the ordinary. But they live in their respective countries, but only as exiles. This is somebody writing about early Christians. They participate in all things as citizens, and they endure all things as foreigners. They share their meals, but not their sexual partners. They are found in the flesh, but do not live according to the flesh. They live on earth, but participate in the life of heaven. They are obedient to the laws that have been made, and by their own lives, they supersede those laws. They love everyone and are persecuted by all. They are not understood, and they are not condemned. They are put to death, but made alive. They are impoverished and make many rich. They lack all things and abound in everything. They are dishonored, and they are exalted in their dishonors. I don't know if that sounds like us today and where we are. But the reality is, I think that we have to know where we are now so we know where to go. If we don't know where we are now, we don't know how to continue to be exiles in this world and where we're supposed to end up. At the end of the day, our goal is to move towards this kingdom of heaven, to move out of the earth that we've been living in and live in this intersection between the two. But so many times we're pulled back into the earth. We're pulled back to the way that we were and not living into this exile mode. My hope is as we go through this series and we start to see ourselves as the audience that Peter is writing to, we find ourselves living in this way that is just different. We find ourselves challenging the things that we've thought before and challenging the thoughts that we've had, but also moving ourselves to a new way of living that looks more like the kingdom of heaven than this kingdom and this empire here on earth. And so I would just ask you to evaluate that within your own heart and your own mind. As we close today, and I apologize, we started a little late and I went a little long and all those kind of things. I just want to pray for us as we do that. If you would you stand with me as we close?